MSD podcast, Brave Actions Taken. The late Bill Hall was a dear friend of mine, and this podcast is from an interview I conducted with him for an article providing a glimpse into his long life and dedicated service. Some of the content of this podcast was not part of the article, as it was more specific in regard to details of prior training, situations faced, and brave actions taken. Some of it is in Bill's own words, and some of it is from my times and recollections of our long and special friendship. Bill sat down with me for several hours with his eyes closed, thinking back and talking of his recollections of serving in World War II, the training he underwent, and after his retirement, situations faced in the protection of his family and others. Bill was a gentleman of faith, courage, and conviction. He was a father figure in my life and my business advisor. When I first met him, he told me I had the worst business model he had ever seen, but the very best business model for setting and maintaining standards in self-defense and close combat. In the decades Bill and I spent as friends, as well as training together, people would say, "I saw you with your father or grandfather," and I would say, "No, that's my best mate, Bill." Bill first joined the Armed Forces in 1937, joining the New Zealand Territorial Forces 1st Otago Regiment. When the 2nd Scots were formed, Bill transferred to them and was later selected to join the Independent Company. Bill considered the Independent Company an irregular forces type outfit, and this is where he got his early instruction in military unarmed combat and military self-defense. This was armed and unarmed combat from World War I. When the New Zealand government decided not to send soldiers under the age of 21 to serve in the army overseas, Bill joined the Air Force. He transferred to the 3rd Otago Regiment, where he became a private and peeled potatoes for 6 weeks before leaving for the Royal New Zealand Air Force, where he went through No. 1 composite course in Rotorua. This was with the first group of air crew to go there. After completing his pilot training, he was sent to Canada to fly on what was known as secret aircraft. In all, there were 14, including Bill, preparing to be navigator wireless operators on the secret aircraft that turned out to be Mosquitoes. Halfway through the course, Bill was interviewed by Tiny White and informed the New Zealand government was no longer intending to purchase a squadron of Mosquitoes, and that Bill and the rest of the group would have to stay on the courses they were on. Bill completed his course and finished up as a wireless operator air gunner. From Canada, Bill went to the United Kingdom, where he finished up on 626 Squadron, No. 1 Bomber Command. It was during Bill's training phase in the United Kingdom that he underwent unarmed combat training. For the unarmed combat training, because of the particular squadron Bill was serving in, they were taken away each day for 3 weeks, where they were taught hand-to-hand combat at an undisclosed location. Bill's instructor was a stocky Scottish corporal who was extremely proficient, and his methods were quite simple. He instructed in the following manner. He would demonstrate the skill twice, then you would practice the skill 3 times. If you got it correct the first time, then that was good, and you could continue. If you got it wrong twice, you would get a good slap on the back, and if you could not get it right the 3rd time, you would end up flat on your back by means of the skill being used on you. Bill describes this hand-to-hand combat as methods of self-preservation, designed to completely eliminate the enemy in the shortest possible time, using anything that was handy in order to accomplish this result. Or if there was no improvised weapon available, well then it was bare hands, boots, and your entire body. Bill said although the training was often referred to as unarmed combat, it included a lot of armed combat. Training was referred to as the Dirty Tricks Brigade. Bill stated he had the privilege of flying with some very brave men. If anyone said they were not afraid, well, then they simply were not there. Bill described in detail to me, including demonstrating the skills he had learnt on his intensive and extensive unarmed combat course, as well as the skills that he was instructed in with the Independent Company training he received. He was issued with a very powerful spring-loaded switchblade that he said would penetrate plywood. He learnt how to take the enemy out by armed and unarmed means, including with his bare hands, quickly and quietly. Interestingly, he said, seldom were they given a name or title for a skill. It was just, this is how you break someone's neck. This is how you crush someone's windpipe. This is how you kill someone with a dagger. Many years after the war, at an Air Force ex-members gathering, Bill was talking of his time in the United Kingdom on his specialist armed and unarmed combat course, and some of his former Air Force comrades looked at him somewhat bewildered and explained they had not undergone that particular training. They asked him questions about the description of the aircraft he flew on, including the colour of certain parts of the aircraft, and they informed him that he was part of a specialist trained crew, hence why he had undergone commando type armed and unarmed combat training. This was something that Bill did not even realise at the time, as he thought every group coming through training received it. Bomber Command suffered the biggest and most horrific casualties of the war. They were informed that 1 hour's flying was the equivalent to 8 hours hard labour. Bomber Command operated throughout the entire war on a continuous basis, but at the end of World War II, they were not acknowledged in any way. The only people that acknowledged the efforts of Bomber Command in crippling the German war effort were the Germans themselves, and that's contained in both the Goebbels diaries and in the comments of both Speer and Hitler. Most of Bomber Command's flights were at night for a very good reason. The guns they had on the aircraft were 303s and were calibrated to 150 to 200 yards, depending on the wishes of the gunners. That was the maximum distance you would see another aircraft at night in hostile skies. That left you a fraction of a second to react to any threat that might arise. In daylight, the German fighters' cannons could sit out there at 1,000 yards and have a crack at you if you were on daylights, and with the 303s, you couldn't get anywhere near them. Prior to the end of the war, Bill's squadron was equipped with Rose turrets, which had 2 5s in the rear turret that made daylight operations a lot more comfortable. There were only 200 Rose turrets made, and they were only issued to particular squadrons. We also had great navigational and radar equipment to help us. Towards the end of World War II, the western portion of Holland was cut off together with 3.5 million Dutch people and the German occupying forces. The Dutch population was starving. The Germans had taken everything they possessed, and they had no medical supplies, no fuel, and no food. This was to be the beginning of what was known as the Hunger Winter. Bill explained they were called to the briefing room and were told that 23,000 Dutch women and children had already died, and more were dying every day. We were then asked to volunteer to fly low-level operations to drop food to the Dutch people. As far as Bill is aware, all crews on his squadron and throughout Bomber Command volunteered. Originally, the army was asked to invade that area of Holland but declined, on the basis that, as the Germans had already blown the dikes, it would be impossible without horrific casualties for the army and the Dutch population. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands appealed to the King of England, to President Roosevelt, to Prime Minister Winston Churchill, to Eisenhower, and to Montgomery to try and do something, because they feared it would be a horrific death toll and seriously harm the Dutch nation. The only way in which the situation could be resolved was from the air. This is how the Mana operation was mounted. There was no guarantee by the Germans in the first 3 days that they would not fire on us, and we were told that there were 450,000 German troops underneath us. There were no guarantees, but they hoped they would not fire on us. The first operation consisted of approximately 250 Lancasters. They flew 200 to 300 feet above the English coast when a broadcast was made in German, Dutch and English, appealing to German forces not to fire on the force of Lancasters approaching the Dutch coast, as they were carrying food and not bombs. The effect on all air crews was immediate. They dropped to about 50 feet or less above the sea, going in over Holland, passing German gun pits where the gunners were winding their anti-aircraft guns trying to get a bead on them. The Dutch people in any high buildings were waving anything and everything to us. We passed windmills and two-storied buildings where the people were looking down on us. To wave back, we had to look up to do so. On the 1st of May, we went to Valkenburg to drop food that was contained in gunny sacks, free fall, no parachutes. Shortly after we pulled up, our rear gunner reported that his rear turret was on fire, and we came home from Holland in that manner. Every time the fire flared up, our rear gunner and the flight engineer, who was a fellow of about 16.5 stone, who had gone back to assist the rear gunner, vaulting the main spar of the Lancaster with a fire extinguisher in each hand. That is almost an impossible feat, as the only way you could ordinarily get over the main spar in a Lancaster was to sit on it carefully, roll yourself up in a ball, and roll over it. Bill has another clear vision in his mind of going over the dikes at about 10 or 20 feet above the water, where they had a Lancaster to their port side facing directly towards a Dutchman on top of a dike, waving furiously and pointing to a German anti-aircraft position. The Lancaster was heading straight for him, and at the last minute he turned around and dived off the dike, showing a big red patch on the seat of his pants. Bill says he was a braver man than most to stay there as long as he did. The Dutch people were absolutely marvellous. They were out on the streets waving at us. It was the first ever food drop, and Bomber Command finished its war flying humanitarian missions. The Dutch credit Bomber Command's Mana operations with saving the lives of 3.5 million Dutch people. After the first 3 days of Mana, the Germans agreed not to fire on us. The USAAF then joined the food drop operations. They named their effort Chowhound. After the war, I returned home on a ship called the Multan, sailing into Wellington Harbour just before Christmas Day 1945 to find the wharfies were on strike and refused to tie us up. The ship sat out in Wellington Harbour for 4 hours before they tied us up and the North Islanders disembarked. The Multan then headed for Littleton, where the South Islanders disembarked and returned home. After the war, of course, most of us were still suffering from the effects for some time. Bill told me after he returned from the war, there were several incidents where he was out in the street and heard a loud noise like a car backfire and hit the ground. Such were the effects of what he had undergone in war. I was fortunate that the girl I left behind to go to war was waiting for me and later become my wife. 3 months after I retired, we were attacked at our holiday home. When we were attacked, I used skills which I had been taught in World War II. There were 10 or 11 people involved in the attack, and the police report said there were up to 100 present. I thought there were 70, and the neighbours reported over 150. There were only 10 or 11 that actually came at me. The ringleader, who made the first move, was in his 20s and a well-known fighter. He attempted to use his skills, and I reacted, bending him over, and to be honest, for a second, was going to kill him. I came within inches and seconds of doing that when it flashed through my mind that this was a New Zealand citizen that I was about to kill. I stopped and threw him down and away from me. My understanding from the police is that he was incapacitated for about 3 months. Police stated there was a good chance if they had got me on the ground, they would have kicked my head in. However, if I had killed one of them, I would have faced a manslaughter or murder charge. I then decided to go back and brush up the skills I possessed prior to 1945. I did not realise there was any unarmed combat training available, so I visited 3 martial arts schools in Dunedin. Each of the instructors at these schools asked me of my previous experience, and I briefly outlined it. The first 2 advised me to go and see Geoff Todd at the School of Self-Defence. The third instructor stated that he thought he could beat me easily, as he just returned from training overseas. I asked him how he would do that, and he replied he would kick me. He then demonstrated his actions, at which point I laughed and informed him he had been dead for the past 15 seconds. He then too recommended I go and visit Geoff Todd at the Self-Defence School. I went to visit Geoff Todd at that time and explained how incensed I was in regard to the attack as they not only threatened myself but also threatened my wife and to burn down my holiday home. Bill explained to me how this large gathering beside his holiday home were having a party and had removed property from his holiday home and were burning it on a bonfire. Bill, his wife and family were in the holiday home, and Bill went next door to retrieve his property, at which point he was surrounded and the ringleader, a well-known fighter, advanced on him and tried to attack him. In that split second, Bill chin-jabbed him, kneed him, and introduced him to an edge-of-a-hand strike. He had spent decades forgetting what he had undergone in World War II, and in a fraction of a second, he had utilized his training to incapacitate a much younger aggressor. The implication that my wife would be harmed had quite an effect on me, and this is what brought me to the School of Self-Defense. I explained to Geoff my situation, current health and background, and found that he could provide what I was looking for. I trained for 6 months, and I provided some nervous moments for my training partners as my reactions and actions of the past tended to at times be reflex and not pulled short. Bill told me that the first time he entered our training facility and observed me instructing, it was like being back in the United Kingdom under the instruction of his World War II commando unarmed combat instructor that very much reminded him of me. I've had a long association with the School of Self-Defense since I began the training that I needed to avoid killing someone in a self-defense situation. It has been my pleasure to be associated with the School of Self-Defense. I have met many fine people, and their code of conduct that proclaims the more knowledge you possess, the more responsible you are, has my full backing and confidence. I learnt many methods over the above what were taught in World War II. What I was taught in World War II was to bring everything to a final fatal conclusion in a very small space of time. What I have learnt at the School of Self-Defense is to immobilize your assailants in order that you might walk away in the same small space of time. Bill was a man of faith, deeply religious, and he told me the good Lord never said that you could not defend yourself under assault, and he would relate to the fighting padre that would not carry a rifle in war, but would carry a sharpened entrenching tool and would use it in his defense or the protection of his comrades. At the invitation of the Food and Freedom Foundation in Holland, I was invited to be part of the Mana Association visit to Holland in 1995, which was the 50th anniversary of the Mana food drops. They took 2 New Zealanders, 2 Australians, 4 Canadians, 40 Englishmen, 40 Americans, and 8 Poles, all aircrew that had flown these operations. We flew 5 such operations, and I presume that this is why we were selected. There are other New Zealanders who also flew. There are south of Christchurch 3 of us, and there are another 3 in Christchurch, to the best of my knowledge, who flew these operations. The Dutch people paid for my airfares and permitted me to take my wife with me and hosted us for 8 days. They put us in old military vehicles and paraded us through all the areas where we had dropped the food for the people. Even though they did not need to do so, standing in the streets of Amsterdam and Rotterdam, The Hague, and every other area, between 8 and 10 deep, just to say thank you to us. We found their gratitude overwhelming. It was a tremendous experience, one which we will never forget. To come along 50 years later and say thank you was tremendous. They again invited us to go to Holland in the year 2000, but unfortunately we were unable to make this journey as I had a leg injury. Part of the journey included a visit to the Royal Palace where we met Prince Bernhard, who personally thanked a representative from each country for what they had done for the Dutch people. At the ceremony, the sole remaining flying Lancaster flew overhead at about 100 feet, and that was quite impressive. I consider Prince Bernhard to be, in my opinion, the bravest man there. He was suffering from terminal cancer and had been in hospital for approximately 4 months and had discharged himself from hospital in order that he could stand there and receive us. We felt very humble that he should do that for us. We visited all the drop sites and the Freedom of Rotterdam and truly enjoyed our time in Holland. It had always been my belief that everyone in Bomber Command did the same hand-to-hand combat course that we did. It never crossed my mind that it was not standard practice throughout Bomber Command, and I was surprised to learn some years ago that this was not the case. Why a particular squadron was selected, I honestly do not know. At the end of World War II in Europe, we were asked to transfer onto other aircraft and volunteer to go directly from Great Britain to Iwo in order that the war against Japan could be finalised. VE Day in Europe was the 8th of May 1945, the day in which we flew the last Mana operation. After that, they came around and asked all the Australian and New Zealand crews to transfer onto other aircraft, fly the aircraft out to Iwo and then partake in the bombing of Japan. Why we were not taking Lancasters to Iwo was because we could not close our bomb doors on the biggest bombs that were then being made. The aircraft that we were to transfer onto could close the bomb doors on a 22,000-pounder. Many years ago, I had a friend that offered to make me a model Lancaster and asked me if I had any photographs. I gave him the photographs, and the aircraft had a yellow dot painted on the front. It was quite large, and he said to me that we were a special crew. I replied, no, we weren't, and he informed me that we were. I replied, well, nobody ever told us anything about it. Approximately 4,000 New Zealanders flew with Bomber Command, of whom approximately 2,000 died and approximately 500 were prisoners of war. 200 more were seriously wounded. When I returned home from the war, I went back to working at the post office, working in the money order and savings bank divisions. I completed my accountancy qualifications and also was a part-time student at Otago University. I worked all day and studied all night, achieving my Bachelor of Commerce. On completing this, I obtained further qualifications. I was next offered a transfer by the post office to head office in Wellington, which I declined. I later moved to a Dunedin firm of public accountants and worked for them for the next 2 or 3 years, mainly doing auditing. My next position was Secretary Accountant for J&W Faulkner Limited. I was then offered a position as Finance Controller for Reckitt and Coleman. That involved a transfer to Auckland, so I declined the offer. I then joined the New Zealand Plunket Society as their New Zealand Treasurer and spent the next 21 years until retirement in this position. I was responsible for the control of considerable government funds and preparation of yearly and 3-yearly budgets that entailed a considerable amount of management accounting. The Plunket Society at the time had 334 cars on the road, owned around $10 million worth of property, and had in the vicinity of 790 employees. I retired in 1986 and since have held a number of voluntary positions with various organisations working to help as many people as possible. I was the Otago President of Grey Power for a number of years, mainly involved with assisting the elderly and needy. I wrote the submissions to the Human Rights Commission regarding asset stripping of the elderly and also was involved in considerable negotiations with government around the issues of the treatment of our senior citizens. I am also president of the Breve Club Otago and have been an executive member of the Dunedin RSA, and at present I am a trustee of Dunedin RSA Welfare Trust. I have been a member of the School of Self-Defence since 1986. Bill went on to explain Bomber Command standard operating procedures he served under in World War II. Firstly, there is a list posted of all air crews on standby. Then the station is completely sealed off. All telephone links are cut and all leave is cancelled. Crews have a meal depending on what time the operation is planned to get underway. The Catholic members of the crew, after eating, would attend Mass in the boiler room at the back of the mess. All the crews to fly that night would be assembled in the briefing room and the doors would be locked. There would be a blind covered map at the front of the room, and when the room was sealed off, the blind would be lifted, revealing the operational plan for the night. All the leaders of the various sections of the aircrew give their briefings. The station commander speaks, and after that, the squadron leader or wing commander in charge of the operation will brief the crews. The pilots, then the navigators, followed by the wireless operators and the gunners and the bomb aimer, as well as the flight engineer, would all have their turn at speaking. After each person spoke, they would finish off with asking if there were any questions. The Met officer would also brief the crews in relation to the weather and anticipated conditions and changes of conditions en route to and from the target. You would also be briefed in regards to all the known flak areas and where we might encounter enemy fighters on the way in and out. When briefing was over, you would move to the crew room, etc., then to your aircraft. Sometimes you were put on standby, so then you would wait around for half an hour or more out at the aircraft dispersal. When given the signal to go, you would get in the aircraft and perform final checking procedures. Your ground crew is there with you at dispersal. Their duties are to maintain the aircraft and ensure it is fully ready to go. During the day of the operation, after the ground crew have fully prepared the aircraft, you would complete what is known as a DI, short for daily inspection. This is your responsibility to check your own equipment and to make sure that everything is functioning correctly. If there was anything that you were not happy with, then you would refuse it and would be the ground crew's responsibility to ensure it was fixed. The chief of our ground crew had been in the RAF for about 25 years and was excellent at his job. The only difficulty we had was that he would not even enter our hut, but would instead come to the door and stand rigidly at attention. It took us quite some time to cure that attitude, but eventually we did so. Our ground crew were marvellous and did everything they could do to help us. Normally, a squadron would operate around 18 aircraft, and on being given the go-ahead, taxi out around the perimeter of the airfield, of which a bomber airfield is between 10 and 15 miles. We would line up at the end of the runway, and on the green light, the pilot would put the brakes on and rev the motors and open them up as much as he possibly can, and then let the brakes off. You are rolling. Then with a Lancaster, you let it go down the runway and eventually it will lift off. One evening when we were the next in line for takeoff, the aircraft in front of us attempted to lift off early. We watched as it bounced 3 times before becoming airborne, much to our relief. What should have happened is that the undercarriage should have collapsed, the aircraft should have blown up, and the chain reaction would have been to take the rest of us with him. We would fly in a gaggle, in what was called a bomber stream. Operations would vary in length of time. The longest operation we did was 10 hours and 50 minutes from start to finish. The pilot would hand control over to the bomb aimer on run up to the target, and he would give corrections. Our bomb aimer was Colin Grant from Lake Hayes, and his voice used to go up in pitch the closer we got to the target. He would give his directions as left and right if they were major corrections, and say left left or right right for minor corrections. On the target, you would hear him say, "Bomb's gone," and the aircraft would lift considerably. We would get out of there and head for home. On landing, you would be interrogated by the intelligence personnel, and they would want to know all information in relation to the operation and anything you had seen, like heavy flak areas or positions where you came under enemy attack. Every aircraft carried approximately 1 hour extra fuel, so if you were not down in 1 hour somewhere in England, then the aircraft was posted as missing unless other information was available. There were 7 crew members on a Lancaster: pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner. Everyone worked together as a unit to achieve a common objective. Bomber command effectiveness is confirmed by German records. I would like to end this honest and emotive account of my dear friend Mr. Hall's recollections of details of his record of service by saying, "Thank you, Bill. I am proud and honoured to be your friend, and let us not forget those who did not return and gave their ultimate sacrifice to ensure our freedom." Following is from my friendship with Bill from 1986 until his passing in 2012. I was privileged to be a close friend of Bill's for over 25 years and share with him some special times. You will have read from the interview I conducted with Bill information in regard to his training at the School of Self-Defence at Todd Group HQ and about his military service and training, as well as his career and life after World War II. The following are details of a special personal friendship nature in regard to the two of us being committed to military armed and unarmed combat and military self-defence. There are some things that most of you would not have been aware of in regard to Bill's close combat background and ongoing involvement, as Bill was a private man when it came to such things. He was not one to divulge too much to anyone that did not need to know, and he always was very humble when it came to his background and service record. He very much played down his close combat background and expertise, or would simply say, "I didn't do anything special or different to anyone else I served with." Claiming he did not know he trained in specialist military close combat skills was one way Bill would get out of telling anyone that asked him questions about his training background that he did not want to disclose such information to. And over 25 years, I spent much time with Bill, training, instructing, recruiting, and working in every aspect of our military self-defence and close combat tradecraft. Bill was not only a best friend and my father figure, but also taught me about business practices, and he was my accountant and the expert behind the Todd Group training provision business success. He always told me problems were to be solved, and when I spoke to him of major problems, he would start by saying, "Oh boy," and then get on to how best to solve the problem. When Bill first came to the old HQ, which you will have already read about in my previous interview or heard about earlier in this podcast, he was very specific in what he wanted to learn. He wanted to know how to incapacitate the threat, not kill an aggressor. The skills he possessed from World War II were lethal military kill or die specific means and methods. It didn't take long before he opened up and showed me the skills he possessed and where they come from. Although he told me that under his 3 weeks of full-time intensive armed and unarmed combat training in the UK, often the skills were introduced not by name, but as this is how you kill the enemy by destroying this life support system or that one by this means or method. There were usually no names or titles of individual skills given, but there could be no mistaking how competent and capable Bill was, hands-on, unarmed and armed. He certainly was adept with a dagger, including its concealment, drawing and usage. While most of his dagger actions were straight line, quickest extension retraction means and methods, he also was proficient in short travel X-cut, disarm disabling slashes. He disclosed to me that his instructor was well versed and qualified in the Fairburn system, and what he taught was that of SOE origins. Bill's preferred unarmed combat skills were stamp kicks, hand-edge strikes, the chin jab, and knees to the groin. Bill was in his element at our old HQ self-defence school and really enjoyed not only the training but also instructing me in his specialist Brit close combat. The silent killing skills he instructed me in were covert, minimum movement, physicality orientated because of their point-blank body contact range initiation by hardened hostile means. Some were employed by gross motor skills, overkill, immediate destruction means, while others were by gradual increases of hard, heavy, secured pressure until the threat was terminated. Unarmed gagging and respiratory restriction that he referred to as silent suffocation, or spinal cord destruction, spinal dislocator by opposing forces momentum, were two of his deadly capabilities in his bag of deadly tricks brigade expertise. I explained to Bill the 3 phases of training I had further developed from what Harry Baldock had taught me to provide fitting capabilities for basic civilian self-defence, as well as for security and law enforcement, and for regular force and military elite training provision. He thought this was perfect and was a responsible modus operandi when it came to military self-defense and military close combat. Not publicly releasing advanced or specialist skills to anyone that had not come up through the ranks and passed testing and been accepted for promotion was something that Bill fully supported and endorsed. He thought our testing phases were more advanced to anything he had ever seen, not only in regard to the skills, but also safety and being realistic and challenging. Through Bill, I learnt skills he was instructed in as part of his independent company training and his Brit World War II armed and unarmed combat training. Bill enjoyed learning from me the skills of Harry Baldock, Charlie Nelson, and Colonel Applegate. He thought the post-World War II work Charlie Nelson had put into self-defense for civilian usage was second to none. Some of the skills Bill taught me were included in the tradecraft training videos Colonel Applegate had me put together and send to him before I visited him. Colonel Applegate recognised the skills Bill had shown me as being of Fairburn SOE origins, and when I took Bill to the range to show him the Applegate instinctive point shooting, he said it felt like he was back under training like he had gone through in the UK. Interestingly, he used his middle finger to pull the trigger and his index finger to point indexing the target. His method of rifle point shooting was very different to what I had learnt, but was still very effective. Bill very much loved being around the lads and lasses training at Todd Group HQ and was involved in many of our training undertakings, including hosting a survival combative course at Long Beach where he had a holiday house. He enjoyed meeting my military close combat mates like Ron Evans, Larry Jordan and others. Bill attended the Skillet Arms CQB training instructed by Larry Jordan, as well as attending my preparation training pre-1990 prior to my Special Forces Combative Instructor qualification course. Bill was always there to assist members with financial advice and assistance and was respected and held in the highest regard. He was a constant source of advice and assistance and was involved with many of my projects, inventions and tactics and skills development. After a car accident, Bill's health declined and he ended up in hospital and spent his last days in a veteran's home. I spoke to Bill on Thursday, October 25th, 2012, before I left for Auckland to conduct a specialist CQB course of instruction. I let him know I'd be back on Sunday. On Saturday, October 27th, during conducting of the course, I received a call from Bill's son, Lyndon, to tell me Bill had passed away. Although Bill was in his 92nd year and had suffered recent health issues, it shocked me to hear of his death. I had to take a step back and think about completing my duties and about getting back home so I could see Mrs. Hall. When Bill had been hospitalised and when he went to the veterans' home, all he wanted to do was get well enough to get home and look after Mrs. Hall, or as he called her, Curls. He used to say if Curls ever wanted to leave him, she had to take him with her. Bill was very proud of his involvement with the Plunkett Children's Car Seat Initiative. He was always eager to be involved with my many CQC and self-defense projects and would always offer his advice and suggestions. He thought my TSB 45, Tactical Safety Baton 45 degrees south, was a marvellous invention and told politicians and police what an advancement it was in baton design. Bill thought Kelly Cowboy Mitchell, my 2IC, also an Elite Forces Close Combat Master Instructor, with his engineering expertise, had done some top-class work producing working models of the TSB 45. Bill fully endorsed Cowboy as my 2IC and future successor as the Group Master Chief Instructor. The considerable contribution Bill has made to our schools of instruction is enduring and will always be very important to me. Bill was sharp of mind to the very end and kept actively involved with not only our self-defense and close combat, but with assisting veterans and those that needed his help. Looking back through archives, records and projects, plans that Bill was involved in here at Todd Group HQ, there are so many memories of Bill. There was a DVD made by a film school student titled Story of the Tank about my military close combat, in which Bill was interviewed about my training provision and told the interviewer that I had outstanding knowledge and was the best instructor he had ever seen. These words meant so much to me coming from Bill, and like many things Bill told me and taught me, I will always hold dearly. I don't seek acclamations, but when they come from those I respect and hold in the highest regard, that is most satisfying. And coming from Bill, when I was so close to him for so long, and he was so involved in my close combat pursuit of excellence, it is very much appreciated. Bill shared in the same values as I do when it comes to qualification and expertise, and that is volunteering for training and testing and proving oneself, earning rank, position, and status. Bill knew that in the kill or die terminal realities of military close combat actions on, there is no place for anyone or anything less than best of trained, tested, proven, and qualified. Bill was very proud of our HQ lineage and the pioneer and next generation of instructors that were part of it. Bill and I regularly compared the skills he had learnt in the independent company and in the UK with the skills I'd been taught and had developed. Bill would always, with business, management and accounting, work by the guideline of assess, decide, execute. And when he heard me modify this saying and use it in CQC, like evade, assess, execute, he would remind me that it come from his saying. In fact, before I left for Auckland, before he passed away, he said, don't forget his assess, decide, execute ethos with a big smile on his face. Bill got much pleasure in showing me his survival kit from World War II, including his improvised navigation button and fold-away aircrew sunglasses. Bill was a most respected life member and a guest of honour at the 80th anniversary celebrations. He would tell everyone that our self-defence training was the best and cheapest insurance you could get when there were no out options available. I can remember driving with Bill more than once, and all of a sudden he would perform the sign of a crucifix, and then I would see a hearse and funeral procession approaching. Bill was a man of integrity, loyalty with honour, and was not afraid to take a stand, and he also had a good sense of humour. I can remember him saying that it was once said that a said politician had the brains of an ass, and he replied, no, he hasn't. Bill fought hard for New Zealand Bomber Command aircrew recognition of their service and sacrifice. Bill always had my best interests in mind, and I can remember him putting a cocky bank clerk straight and having him replaced by the bank manager. He would remind bankers and those that were negotiating business with us that a contract was not a contract until signed by all parties, and any agreements provided prior to this were open to amendment. Bill was in his element in attendance at the International Close Combat Instructors Association gatherings, where he enjoyed the company of current and retired Allied military high-ranking close combat instructors. Bill fought for the rights of those that were in need of help with relentless commitment. I was once contacted by a gentleman who had read an article I'd written about Bill, telling me how Bill, in the early 1980s, assisted Mosgiel residents in keeping their country area hospital open when the powers that be wanted it closed. He said, unfortunately, a decade later, after Bill had retired, the hospital was closed. When Mrs. Hall asked me to speak at Bill's funeral, I knew it would be one of the most difficult things I would do, and I can remember the overwhelming emotion and sadness I felt standing up there in front of Mrs. Hall and the Hall family and Bill's friends. And I can remember starting out by saying, someone without emotion is dangerous, and right now I am having difficulty controlling my emotions, so please bear with me. I was determined to show my love, respect and loyalty to Bill, a true father figure who treated me like a son. Major Fred Daniels spoke at Bill's funeral, and this is taken from what he had to say. Ex-service personnel, family and friends, we're gathered here to pay our respects and tribute to a serviceman, NZ 427279 Warrant Officer and 075427 Lance Corporal William Edward Hall, RNZAF and New Zealand Army. Bill served as a volunteer with the 1st Otago Regiment and 2nd Scots Regiment before enlisting at age 20 into the Army on 15 December 1941, where he was selected for Special Operations training in Australia as part of the 1st Independent Company. While the New Zealand Army abandoned this type of specialist training almost right away, many of this group after the initial course went on to serve with the LRDG, SAS and SBS. However, with the pressure on to recruit aircrew for service in the United Kingdom, Bill, on the 11th of July 1942, opted for this overseas service by transferring to the RNZAF for aircrew training in New Zealand. Then, on July 18, 1943, he travelled with 123 aircrew on the troopship Wharton from Wellington, New Zealand to San Francisco for advanced training in Canada and in the United Kingdom. Bill flew on active service and operations over France and Germany, as well as participating in Operation Mana, which was the airdropping of food over Holland, Belgium and Germany, and the recovery back to the United Kingdom of POWs in the lead up to and immediately after VE Day. Bill was promoted to the rank of Warrant Officer 2, and although he was recommended 3 times for a commission, he declined the promotion opportunities. Bill returned from overseas on 20 December 1945, landing at Wellington on the 2 NZEF troopship Multan, together with 207 officers and 2,575 ORs. He eventually discharged from the RNZAF service after a period of 3 years, 233 days on March 1, 1946. His grey power community advocacy, coupled with his dedicated, fearless, single-minded, uncompromising approach towards the well-being of his Otago RSA comrades over 27 years, was acknowledged with life membership in 2007, as well as the National RNZ RSA Merit Badge and 30-year Otago and Southland District Long Service Award in May 2012. For his service to New Zealand, Bill was awarded the following campaign and service medals: the 1939 to 1945 Star, the France and Germany Star, the Defence Medal, the War Medal 1939 to 1945, the New Zealand War Service Medal. During a time of war, Bill fought the good fight for his country and his friends, and we thank God for his steadfastness in adversity, for his courage in the day of battle, and for the memories he is left to us who knew him. And we pray that we and each succeeding generation in this land, ever keeping the valour of our returned servicemen and servicewomen in proud remembrance, may strive to be worthy of their service overseas and in our land, to the glory of God and the freedom of mankind. Bill was a practical realist when it came to self-defence and close combat, with an eye for what was best practice and what was not. If he observed less than best skills training, he would simply walk away, but if asked, he would give it straight as to shortcomings, risks, dangers, and the likelihood of defeat. Many of the training, admin, and course and training joining practices at HQ were influenced by Bill, including the CQC Code of Conduct contracts. He was very proud of our international allied military instructor connections and our oldest private European military specialist tradecraft training provision and instructor qualifications lineage directly from some of the leading allied pioneer instructors of his era and the next generation of Master Chief instructors. Even in Bill's senior years, he was actively involved with training and assisting, including being a protectee on one of our specialist close personal protection courses that he got much pleasure in being part of, and gave the close protection detail quite the runaround of places he wanted to go, ensuring they were put through their paces. Whenever I called Bill and Mrs. Hall answered the phone, I'd hear her call out, "Bill, Geoff is on the phone," and I'd hear him reply, "Oh good." The feeling was always mutual, and we very much enjoyed each other's company. I was always very protective of Bill, and so were all his mates at the Todd Group, as we knew how courageous he was and how he would never back down in any conflict and would always stand up for what was right and against those that were wrong. Bill and I would talk about the history and pioneers of military close combat, and Bill would say he was surprised when he found our self-defence school, as he did not think there were any schools providing training in European military close combat and military self-defence, and that if it wasn't for the late Harry Baldock instructing me and my dogged determination to be trained by leading pioneer instructors of World War II, our tradecraft skills might well have been lost for good. He was as proud as I am of our special lineage and longest history. Bill had done a bit of boxing training in his younger day and enjoyed coming along and watching our fighters training. I told Bill I'd done my boxing coach's license under Av Luxon in Oamaru, and he said he knew of Av and he had boxed in North Otago himself. This has been but a glimpse into the life of Bill and the many special times we shared at Todd Group HQ and Camp Todd.